Afternoon, everyone. My name is Ed Frank, and welcome to our webinar, Cooperation in Motion, the Automotive Opportunity. It's great that you could all join us today. We've had really unprecedented response today with almost 500 people joining us from around the world, 100 corporations, over 250 startups, and of course, 4 different competitors who are here to talk about how they could cooperate with each other. So today's auto manufacturers realize that they really have to move fast and increasingly rely on partnerships and investments. Otherwise, they have the risk of falling behind. So today we have 4 of the largest OEMs joining us today. I'm going to start with SOHALIA OUFFATA, the Director of Platform at BMW iVentures, the investment arm of BMW. Elsa Lamartinie, the VP of Business Labs at Stellantis. And for those of you who are not familiar with Stellantis, I'm sure you're quite familiar with their brands, such as Fiat, Chrysler, Alfa Romeo, Maserati, Opel, and a few others, one of the world's largest automobile manufacturers. Scott Lyons, the global in-vehicle content of the tech partnership team at Ford, and Peter Virk, the Director of Connected Car and Future Technologies at Jaguar Land Rover from the UK. So just a moment to explain the format for today's event. We're going to give the panelists the opportunity to explain how they work with startups and what it is that they're looking for. And we'll be having some questions to make sure that we answer some of the points that we brought up in our description. And then we'll be going to questions. So please, put on the chat under the Q&A or in the chat the questions, and our panelists are quite eager to respond. And one thing I just want to mention is that many times these startups before the event reach out to our panelists with LinkedIn requests, and quite soon afterwards, all of the business plans start appearing. And it's really important, and the purpose of today's webinar is to offer value to the startups. But your chances of engaging with a OEM with a cold email is pretty tiny. And what we are trying to accomplish today is give you the perspective of what is the most effective way for you to work with one of these large automobile manufacturers and how to set your expectations. A word about our company, Axis Innovation. We're based in Tel Aviv. We work with some of the world's largest multinationals to help source new technologies and startups. And we've had the pleasure of working with Ford to create the Make It Drivable campaign the last few years, and have seen thousands of startups all across Europe. And it's been quite exciting to see how the world of mobility has changed over these past few years. So welcome all of you to be in touch with us. I wanted to just mention that we also are going to be putting some polls out there today. We want this to be as interactive as possible. And again, the purpose today is to give value to you who are out there trying to figure out what is the easiest way and the most effective way to work with these large companies. So first, I'd like to introduce SOHALIA OUFFATA from BMW iVentures to give a little background on the work that she does and how she engages with startups at BMW. SOHALIA, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. It's great to be here. So for the ones in the audience that might not know BMW iVentures, we are the corporate venture capital arm of the BMW Group. We've been incepted in 2011, and ever since have been a very active investor in the mobility space. With our spin out of the BMW Group, which we performed roughly 4.5 years ago, where we just took the venture activities external, still remain investing for BMW, but increase significantly the speed, the execution speed specifically for making our investments. We also shifted our mandate more towards the deep tech space. So we are actively looking for technologies, everything around the car, which is obvious. Autonomous driving has been a huge investment area for us, super relevant, everything around connectivity when it comes to the car. We are also very interested in smart production, smart supply chain solutions. We are investing in solutions that help the overall transformation in the IT space. Database technologies, for example, are super interesting to us. So it's not just a narrow focus. We also look into the entire production space, as mentioned. Robotics is a big theme, but also the wider sustainability space. So circular economy is a big theme for us, alternative materials, clean plastic, CO2 neutral steel production. These are all new investment themes for us. We invest around Series A, Series B, so it shouldn't be too early for us, 3 to 8 million on average. We have a team based out of Europe, where I'm based, and our headquarter is in the Silicon Valley. We have the majority of our companies in the US because that's where we source most of our deals. We're also investing heavily in Tel Aviv, super relevant space for us. I know we have people from all around the globe. If you are interested in checking out which companies we're investing in, I'll just post in our chat here our website and ask you to just take a look. We're super active investor, and what differentiates us from other investors that we see ourselves as a hybrid. We are just executing as fast as a financial VC. We have financial performance targets. We believe that offering the greatest strategic value comes by investing in the best companies, which therefore perform financially the best. But we also have access to the BMW network and the deep industry expertise. So that's how we see each other as a hybrid VC. I don't hear you, Ed. You're still muted.
Yes. Thank you very much, Sohalia. Sorry about that. Wanted to thank you for that background. And now moving over to Elsa from Stellantis. And also we have our first question up. We're putting on the polls. We have questions for corporations and for startups. So if you're for a corporation, you can answer. If not, in a couple of minutes, we'll have the startups. Elsa, could you give us some background on Stellantis and the work that you're doing and what you're looking for?
Okay, so first of all, I will start by explaining that Ed explained that Stellantis is quite new, as born in January this year, from the combination of former FCA and former PSA merging in one Stellantis group. And within Stellantis, the mission of the business lab is to bring closer internal entities and startup ecosystem. And within the business lab, we are hosting 3 main devices. I will start quickly by the 2 first one which is incubator, supporting employees' ID growth from the initial ID to the enough maturity level to decide to enter or not in the second dispositif, which is the accelerator, hosting an entrepreneurship program to develop and test new business and operational efficiency opportunities. Regarding startup partnering, how do we work with startups? So first of all, by indirect investment by our partner, Edenest. But our mainly way to work with startup is by collaboration contract. So we collect needs from our colleagues from internal entity dealing with all topics linked to automotive industry and corporate. I mean, customer behavior, e-commerce, retail, aftermarket, not only for B2C customer, but for B2B customer with fleet management and new mobility. We are dealing with technology subjects like electrical vehicle, autonomous driving, connected services, data and artificial intelligence, industry 4.0, including supply chain and circular economy. We are dealing with a solution for support and head office function like HR, real estate, purchase, and for sure we are dealing with digitalization topics. And after that, once we have collected the needs from our internal colleagues, we are scouting for startup, but we don't have direct contact with startup, as Ed explained at the beginning. We are not scouting directly. We are going through our open innovation partner. And for that, we are supported by several kinds of innovation as open innovations partner like business development agencies, for example, BPI France, Choose Paris Region, but NASCOM in India and Le Cubo in Brazil. Some accelerator like Le Village by SEA in Europe, Plug and Play in Detroit, automotive partner like Moveo in France, Business Factory Auto in Spain, and by our partner Edenest regarding startup in their deal flow. And I will finish by a few numbers. So we are scouting around 300 startups per year and signing 30 contracts in average per year with startups.
Thank you very much, Elsa. That was really interesting. And of course, our good friend Scott joining us from Berlin. Scott, could you give us some background on how Ford is working with startups and the work that you're doing and how important it is for Ford?
Sure. Well, first of all, Ed, congratulations on putting this together. And this is I think it's worth saying that obviously out of a conversation that SOHALIA and I have had last year, I think we were always wondering whether this was actually going to happen, and it's really fantastic to kind of see this collaboration, I think, across OEMs. Right at the end of the day, yes, we are competitors, but it is a small industry, and I think it certainly benefits us to be talking with each other. So. As Ed mentioned, I'm actually part of the tech partnerships team. I'm actually based in Berlin. The rest of my colleagues are actually based, of course, in the U.S. We have a very sizable office in Silicon Valley, but also, of course, in Dearborn, in Michigan. We're actually a unique group in that we don't exclusively work with startups. The term tech partnerships is basically what it means. We're obviously working with the Googles of this world. If you saw recently, we actually announced that we're kind of switching over and starting to adopt gas coming from Google. And so, the group that I'm part of was responsible for negotiating that contract. And so, one of the things that's very interesting around the way that we sit is where we're kind of positioned is that we're kind of working with different stakeholder groups across the company that are very interested in solutions. We want to do X, how do we find a partner that delivers Y? And so, that puts us in a very unique position in that we're kind of very much out front. So we're always kind of externally facing, working with companies, both kind of large corporations, of course, in the tech world, but then also in the startup space. And so I think it's a really unique position to be in because we're always being asked and always, I guess, poking internally to say, is it this build versus buy, right? And that is, of course, a debate that will continue to live on, not only at Ford, but I think anywhere. And so we really enjoy kind of having that discussion internally. And working with Ed, I think now, Ed, we discussed this the other day, we will have our 8th Make It Drivable. So I was fortunate enough to co-found a program that we started a number of years ago now called Make It Drivable, which is one of the kind of routes that we use to help fill a pipeline. So every year we kind of look for and socialize this with different stakeholder groups to say, hey, what are you looking for? What's important? What are some of the things that we actually want to deploy in the kind of near and now time frame? And obviously looking at that, we then incorporate that into a brief. We then start to engage with the startup community, and we're actually working with a number of companies that have come through that pipeline. That is not exclusively the only pipeline, of course. We have our research centers that are based. We have one in Tel Aviv. We've got another one here in Aachen. Of course, we've got in the U.S. And Ed, of course, we can start to talk a little bit about this later on in the Q&A around some of the kind of tips and tricks for how you need to engage with a company the size, of course, of the panelists and what we're in. So with that being said, I'm going to throw it back over to Tel Aviv.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott. I think also one of the challenges facing a company like Ford and all our other partners today is how to engage with other people within that corporation. And I think also the Stellantis, which has offices all over the world and so many different brands. The challenge of our panelists is how to find innovative startups that could also reach the challenges that are being faced from all over the world and how to get them in one place. I'd like to now introduce our Peter Virk, who's with Jaguar Land Rover, also an international company with also a strong interest in innovation with the set programs that have been set up around the world. Peter, thanks for joining us today.
So Ed, firstly, thank you for the invitation, and it's great to join, I guess, my OEM colleagues, as we call it in the industry, on this panel. From a Jaguar Land Rover perspective, we've seen the world around us change, and automotive is having this, I guess, reinsurgence of, I guess, bringing technology and partners together. And, we launched our connected cars back in 2014, where we added services like telematics and connected infotainment systems. But the value that we saw since 2014 to now was not only was it the platform that we could create, but actually working in collaboration with startups or later stage startup companies to bring value to our customers. That was the game-changing difference. And, you know, we've had the luxury to have some great innovative hackathons, but also focused development solutions with companies like GoPro, Tile, even Shell, and payment for fuel. So we did some of those world first back in 2016, 17. And it just highlighted how, I guess, we can bring extra value to our customers globally with key partners around the world. And obviously from a connected car perspective, we've now got over 2 million vehicles connected. So people use the basic services from remotely interacting with their vehicles to also being entertained, but also finding services in the car. But now we see the shift change from, I guess, what we used to call telematics to connected infotainment to the truly connected customer. And it's those experiences that's going to bring, I guess, what we call the ACES future together, from autonomy, connectivity, and then electrification. And as we move forwards, shared together. And I think the industry is changing where actually we can bring value together collectively. And it's quite good actually to talk to our competitors, because we all want to reduce fragmentation, but most importantly, we want to deliver what our customers expect, but also surprise them as well by adding value. And I think this is where the industry and the mindset is actually starting to change, because the world is different from North America to Europe and Asia and China. And we've got to make sure that actually some of these innovative products and services have a stage and have a path to do so. And it collectively will make sure that they're safe and secure. But if this starts to add new value to our vehicles, but also to our customers, and these are the things that we want to change. And globally, obviously, we're based in the UK, but we do have development centers in Ireland, in North America, in Portland, in India, and also in China, to make sure that we get the regional specific pieces. And the opportunity, I think, that brings in is diversity, but these things need to last the longevity of our vehicles. And we can only do that through true collaboration through our competitors, because at the end of the day, we're unique from the design of our cars, but the services and the innovation and productivity, there's space to share. And I think that's why it's great and timely to have these calls.
Great, thank you very much. I just wanted to ask our participants out there to please put your questions on the Q&A. We aim this to be an interactive session. So Heli, I'd like to just start off with you and ask you a little bit about, you're one of the only panelists here that are actually investing directly into startups. Could you explain a little bit about how in your company you interact with the partnerships, and you have your financial goals, but in terms of what do you look at when you're looking to invest in a startup?
Yeah, happy to. So first of all, I'd like to say that within our venture fund, I'm responsible for our platform activities, which encompass our partnership activities for the portfolio companies. So I work exclusively for the companies we invest in. We've invested in almost 60 companies by now, so it's quite crazy and busy. And my role here is to broker a relationship to the BMW Group, but also help on the sometimes a bit more complicated part to get automotive certification. Some of the companies we invest in are tier 2s, so it is more relevant to make sure that they are automotive certified and then position them strategically with a tier 1. So it is always sort of a case by case sort of judgment. But given that we are investing in kind of mature companies, or mature at least in comparison to super early stage companies, they have very concrete business needs, and our goal is to help them grow successfully. We collaborate strongly with other OEMs. We co-invest with other OEMs. So that's why I was emphasizing the financial head that we have, because our interest is in growing these companies. We want to grow the best companies in the automotive space. So for the ones of you who had time to take a look at our portfolio, you'll see there are a lot of prominent names on there, because this is sort of our mission, if you would like to say so. And beyond the partnership activities within the automotive ecosystem, I also use the leverage that we have in providing access to customers from other industries. We quite often have companies that offer services that are relevant to the financial services industries, for example, or telecommunications industry. So wherever I have a tie into a certain industry, or I can have the headquarters sort of close by, we are using our relationships. And it's amazing to see what happens if we collaborate with other investors. So I had one of my companies where together with Next 47, which is the venture fund of the Siemens Group, we have then started the business development activities and prepared a beautiful roadshow here in Munich, where we connected the company to LYONS, to Munich Re, and to other large players. And once knocking at their doors and trying to get meetings with the CIO, this was perceived very positively because it was perceived, okay, it's Siemens and BMW Group who are now representing a company. It's not a startup we have never heard of. So this is a way how we can help on the partnership side. I have added in our chat today also a program of the BMW Group, which is called the BMW Startup Garage. It is a super good program specifically tailored for early stage companies. This program is designed to launch pilot projects together with the startups. This is their entire role. We collaborate very strongly with the Startup Garage. We are sort of in the same building and exchange frequently about our deal flow. The benefit with the program is that once selected, you have to obviously apply. They manage the entire relationship to the BMW Group, and they manage what I call the most important part, the procurement relationship. So they have new processes in order to get to a fast supplier number, which allows the startup to work with a gigantic company. So that's super important. They don't take equity. They pay for the pilot program. So it's a pretty good deal. And quite often we review very closely the results of these pilots. And if the companies then grow over time, we find them interesting, we consider investing. So that is a pretty good way in if you are a startup and want to know how to work with the BMW Group. And then obviously, as the other panelists said, there are a lot of tech offices that we have that are specifically focusing on scouting and partnering with startups.
Thank you very much, Sohalia. Scott, over to you. I wanted to ask, we have a question actually from another corporation, maybe you've heard of them, Mercedes-Benz. Pranesh Rajkumar from India is actually asking, how do you usually work as an OEM? Are you going with specific use cases and scout for a relevant startup, or does it go the other way around? Maybe you can give the experience of Ford. It'd be interesting to hear what Pranesh says, how Mercedes deals with that.
Sure. I mean, it's obviously a really tricky question, of course, because we, thinking probably around all the different channels that exist around, hey, we'd love to work with you, cold emails or through LinkedIn or, something else. And unfortunately, I would say a lot of the kind of cold requests for, hey, we'd love to work with you, we've got a great idea, is so broad. And so one of the tips that I always try and give companies and individuals that are, trying to identify someone that they can engage with in an OEM, which frankly, by the way, is not easy. I mean, OEMs are very big. I find myself sometimes acting as the yellow pages, right? Which I don't like to do, right? And because of course I'm not an operator, but I do try and direct things that are interesting. So some of the tips that I guess we can give around, you need to kind of be very specific about what you're trying to offer. I think how does the solution that you have, or the technology that you have, or the solution that kind of, I guess, you're purporting to build, how does that related to what you think we may want to use it for? I do get a lot of times, kind of, I guess, Ed, it reminds me of some of the the meetings that we've had in Tel Aviv, where we've met lots and lots of startups and have met lots and lots of companies who have incredible ideas, but their go-to-market is what's kind of that's where it falls down. So, technology is only as good as how you can actually figure out how to get to market with that. And so that's one of the kind of areas that I think, needs to be thought about. The other thing is, once you identify someone who you work with or who you can work with at a company, like for example at Ford, I've definitely found that I'm working with a startup today on a POC, where one of the things that I found very helpful, and I think it also benefits the startup, is to really document what the gives and the gets are. So, it's almost kind of being very specific around, this is what the project is about. This is what you're delivering. This is what we're delivering. And this is obviously what the potential outcome could be. And that needs to be documented because, a lot of times, and I'm very, very cognizant of this, that a startup has limited resources. And the last thing you want to do as a multi-billion-dollar company like Ford to waste time or resources of a startup that has limited resources. And so I'm very, very focused on making sure that if we do end up wanting to work with a company, even doing a proof of concept, that it's documented and it's very clear. The last thing I'll say, Ed, is unless you actually have a stakeholder, unless there's actually someone internally that really gets what you're trying to do and really understands that and is willing to then socialize that with others across their contacts across the business, I think that you're probably going to be knocking on that door quite often. So, ultimately, frankly, there has never been a better time to consider working within the automotive industry. I think the disruption, frankly, in my mind, is a huge opportunity. I've been at Ford now for, LinkedIn reminds me of this constantly, eight years, 8 years and almost 3 months, which is a long time, a lot longer than I thought. And the wonderful thing about that is day one at Ford versus where I am now, I would say Ford is a very, very different company than when I joined. And I would say that the industry is changing dramatically for the better. And I think that in itself is a really positive thing. We have more to do, obviously, but I think forums like this, obviously engaging with folks like Elsa, SOHALIA, Peter, and others, I think is an incredible thing that we need to continue doing. So, fully supportive of continuing this kind of dialogue. Ed?
I'd just like to add to what Scott just said. I think I forgot to mention that. So as we are a venture fund, we see over 1,000 companies a year. I absolutely don't respond to any cold contact via LinkedIn or anything because it's impossible. I just way too many messages. And then like Ed said, it's still, or like Scott said, sorry, it's not specific enough. So if you are intending to talk to a venture fund, no matter if it's a corporate venture fund or not, I always would try all of the team members. They're always listed on the website. See if you have a connection to that person via LinkedIn. Try to get a warm introduction. That's always the best. If there's absolutely no connection you have, then start with the analyst or the associates, the ones that are screening a lot of companies that might have a bit more time where it's part of the daily job to screen a bunch of companies, and then make it as specific as possible. Also, once tackling the OEM market, while we are all collaborating more with each other, I would say there's still one truth. If you can knock down the first OEM and focus on the first one, and then you go to BMW and tell them, well, we're working with Mercedes and this is what Daimler is doing, is always a good move because it's still a competitive space. And therefore, if you get your first proof points with one specific OEM and you can show that you could grow that account, then is the right time. I wouldn't try to enter a bunch of OEMs at the same time because it's so resource intensive, because they are so large organizations.
So Haley, one thing just to add on that, Ed, before we can go back over to you in Tel Aviv, is it's really interesting, and because so Haley, I cannot remember how many times I've sat in a meeting where someone says, "Oh, we're working with one of the German OEMs." It's a constant, right? Of course, we can only imagine who that would be, but I do think that one of the interesting things at the moment is if you look at, and just taking on what SOHALIA said, is we're all, the opportunity is different when you look at the smartphone, right, space. So smartphones are shipping, hundreds of millions of units every year. And obviously, if you add up all of the volume of all of the automakers, it doesn't hit that. And so, that in itself leads towards working together, right? As Peter said, I think ultimately, in an infotainment space, there's clearly a number of different partners that we're all probably working with. But how do we actually leverage each other's volume to change perhaps some of the things that we don't like? Because a lot of the experiences and a lot of the business models and terms that exist in that space are perhaps not the most appropriate to be used in an in-vehicle setting. And the only way that you'll be able to change that, of course, is by actually working together. And there are different forums that are doing like the Car Connectivity Consortium and others. But anyway, Ed, I think it was just important to state that this is something that needs to be kind of scratched below the surface in terms of, you know, that particular topic.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott. And anybody wants to send the congratulations to Scott for 8 years and 3 months support, do it on LinkedIn. Elsa, I wanted to ask you, we have a question from a advanced materials startup, Sagi Darren, who's asking, you know, we're selling to most of the tier 1 and 2 manufacturers. At what point does it make sense for us to connect directly to an OEM? I would imagine about 80% of the cars are manufactured by the tier 1s. And I think that could use some clarification for startups out there.
Once again, we don't have direct contact, as SOHALIA and Scott explained. This is the same for us, and we don't have direct contact with startup, but we can go through our open innovation partner. If you are referenced towards those partners, it could be the solution for them to present your solution, because we organize some kind of deal flow review with those partners, regular deal flow review, where we have access to those qualified startups. Qualified, as SOHALIA explained, is Series A from Series A with already customer, with already revenue. And to answer to the previous question, we are working in the both way, I mean, pull and push. We are collecting the leads from our internal colleagues, and we are presenting them startup we are in contact with through our open innovation partner once again, and we are pushing the desk and confirm their interest on it. So we are working in the both way, and once again, not contact us directly, don't contact us directly, but by our business development startup partner.
Great, thank you, Elsa. Peter, could you give us a little background on what startups will be more appropriate for tier 1 suppliers as opposed to OEMs?
Sure. So I guess, apologies, I didn't mention, we also have a group called InMotion, who is a fully owned subsidiary of Jaguar Land Rover, and my colleagues there look at a number of different startups. So very similar to, I guess, the role that SOHALIA plays, which is quite important. One of the things I'd say between the tier 1s and the OEMs is, I would say the world has changed. Traditionally, if we were to go back maybe 5 or 10 years, OEMs traditionally only bought solutions, what we used to call black box solutions, from tier 1 suppliers. And that came with the software, the solutions and everything. That landscape has changed because we can define the vehicle through software more, where we've taken more, let's just say, responsibility and insights. However, the tier 1 space is still relevant, mainly because it gives the OEMs, I guess, a little bit more, or the startups, scale. However, at the same time, you can't just work with one tier 1 because you need the diversity. Because if there's one thing that catches us all out, both OEMs and let's just say startups and even other emerging industry technology solutions, is the fragmentation. And it's the fragmentation which actually hurts us all, because it reduces innovation time, it increases costs and maintenance. And these are the things that we need to look at avoiding collectively. Now, of course, there's initiatives like, I think Scott said, the CCC and other programs like that, but they sometimes take time to get off. So one of the things I would say is, yes, you can definitely talk to the tier 1s and see what the opportunity is, but also making sure when you talk to the tier 1s that their approach should be like our approach here. It's not locking and having exclusivity to one tier 1 anymore. You can't do that because you won't get the scale and you'll cause fragmentation. And I think this is where the mindset is changing. So we are driving that from an OEM perspective. It's clear that any startup should have those discussions openly with the tier 1s, and we are seeing the tier 1s mindsets change. You know, it's a decade thing, right? Where the mindset is changing, where they also understand that we need to share and collaborate, because the differentiation is had on other aspects around the vehicle, not necessarily in some of these services. So I think there's a number of tier 1s, but make sure you get the diversity, both with the OEMs and obviously with the tier 1 providers out there, and get the best balance. And the key thing on your mind should be, how do we make sure we work with everybody, we collaborate, we reduce fragmentation, and then any improvements that we put in as an industry, everybody should get the benefits, right? Because that's the shared economy piece. And ultimately, the value is then seen by the end consumer, and the organizations all should grow equally. And I think these are the values that are massively changing.
And I would like to add up to what Peter said. So for the OEMs, is now more the time to work like more like a tech company. I know that sounds cheesy, but that actually means not waiting for the tier one to come up with innovative solutions, but rather sometimes search for their own solutions. And sometimes it could be a balance between accessing an OEM early on, having them as a partner for your certification, the automotive certification, which is specifically for the deep tech companies that are listening in, extremely important, and then use that first pilot project you might already have in order to prepare specifically for a tender. We are talking about long development cycles, multi-year development cycles in the OEM world. That means you need to be prepared, and if your technology is superior and an OEM is aware of that, they will make sure that the tender process includes parts of what they need, which actually you are the one who will be able to provide. So sometimes an OEM can be a great bridge towards a tier one, but you need to balance out. I would never take exclusivity from anyone if possible, unless there's absolutely no way, and it's a mega mass volume producer. So BMW is not a volume producer. We are a premium OEM. So why would it make sense for a startup to take full exclusivity? And that is also not our approach. We in our fund would never ask for that. But that's sort of the way how I would weight it in order to balance between accessing OEM versus tier one.
Yeah, and so just to close on that point, I guess the focus from the OEMs is coming around their strategy. You know, is it around to be an autonomous vehicle or electrified vehicle? But it's about, you know, what does it mean for a performance car? What does it mean for a fully capable off-roading vehicle for us? And it's making sure that your offering has a link to that and bring the two bits together, because I think that's where it adds more value, which a tier one naturally doesn't always do. But then we can do that as an industry. Sorry, Ed.
Thank you, Peter. We are going to put up another poll right now. Again, we have one for corporate listeners and one for startups. So please, we'd like to hear about how you cooperate. So SOHALIA, you mentioned before that the first question you would ask in a startup is, are you selling to other OEMs? I wanted to know if you could maybe give an example of one of the startups in your portfolio that is actively working with some of your competitors.
We have a bunch of companies in our portfolio that are working with other competitors and are also co-invested with other competitors. Proterra is one. We co-invested with Daimler. We just had an exit for ChargePoint through an IPO where we were the first investors and Daimler came in later. We are co-invested with Ford in multiple companies. There are a bunch of players in our portfolio. I would say almost all of the companies, unless they are not really part of the traditional automotive world, and automotive is just one vertical, we then might be their first customer, typically also work with other companies in this space. And we welcome it because it means that these companies are poised to become the leader in their niche.
Okay, Scott, you're not so much a boutique OEM, you're mass market. I'd like to know, maybe you can give a little background on maybe some of the innovations that you have that might have been in another competitor as well.
Well, I think, you know, there are many different examples, but it would be interesting. I wouldn't mind actually touching on one of the questions that's come through from Charlie Henderson here around collaboration versus differentiation, right? Because I think that is something that's really interesting to kind of scratch below the surface on, because ultimately, you know, Ed, if you look at it, the connected car can be updated constantly throughout the life of the vehicle. And therefore, if you consider the fact that that really means that the opportunities are significantly enhanced in terms of what's possible and also what we're looking for. You then balance that with, which I think touches on this question, around open ecosystems. So, you know, I recently, you know, looked at a report that had, you know, a list of all the different OEMs and what platforms they had all committed to, right? In terms of where are they going, what are they doing? If you look a couple of years back, it was kind of all pretty much proprietary platforms, Linux-based, you know, closed ecosystems, and there are still some of those things that are around. But generally, the direction now is similar to what happened in the smartphone industry. You know, there is a coalescing around certain ecosystems. We obviously have decided to go down the Google route. And so that presents an opportunity, and it also presents a challenge, right? The opportunity, of course, is it's an ecosystem. People understand it. It delivers value that I think the customer understands. But then the challenge, of course, is how do you differentiate, right? And I think the differentiation is actually going to be really critical to kind of really separate out one offering from the other. Because frankly, building an electric vehicle versus an ICE, internal combustion engine vehicle, is very different, right? And there are more entrants coming into the market. So there's lots of startups. I mean, 10 years ago, 15, well, of course, there was Tesla, right? But if you look further back, it was very difficult to get into the automotive industry, right? It was a very high bar. That bar is significantly dropped now because, of course, building you know, a battery electric is very, very different. And so one of the things that I'm really focused on, and you know, we've had a lot of discussions internally about this, is if you look at 2030, 2035, and perhaps beyond, the players in this space are going to be very different than they are today. And those players are going to be very, very focused on that differentiation, those experiences, what a customer can actually do in the different types of scenarios that they would use their vehicle for. And we haven't even touched on autonomous, right? Of course, brings up a whole nother potential opportunity. So one of the things that we're really going to be focused on is, one, can we collaborate with other OEMs to help perhaps change some of the direction of some of the areas that we think need to be changed? As I mentioned before, some of the business models, some of the opportunities that we think all of us would benefit from. Then it's up to us individually to do our jobs and to obviously differentiate one vehicle brand from another and to create that experience. And that's where the fun gets, right? You know, that is, in my mind, one of the biggest challenges that I think all of us will face. And it's a really interesting challenge. And I think some are going to do it, and I think others are going to fail. And we don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to be a very interesting 10, 15 years to see where we go.
Thank you, Scott. Elsa, I'd like to also ask you right now, where do you see the drivers in 5 years from now? I think that would be really interesting. You have so many different brands, and the experience is changing. And as Scott mentioned, he's already thinking about 2035. I think our perspective is maybe just 3 to 5 years ahead. So Elsa, what's your view?
I would say we intend to imagine what are our customer expectations for within 5 years. And it's not obvious for our customer to imagine themselves the service they will need or they will like, and the service could not exist today or could exist, but not in the automotive field, in fact. So world for sure is moving fast, and it's not in a linear way. And who would have predicted 5 years ago, for example, this huge development in terms of delivery from meals to second-hand products, for example. And this is a key point for us to work with the startup ecosystem, as this ecosystem is a kind of mirror of the current customer expectation and what is changing. And the key is to be able to launch a new appealing service in only few months to be able to react quite immediately to our customer expectations. So the point is for sure to work hard to imagine and to build from now on what could be the service of tomorrow. And the second point is to be able to react quickly and to be able to develop very quickly in only few months what will be the next customer expectation.
Thank you. Peter, you've been at Jaguar Land Rover for quite some time. Do you agree with Elsa in terms of the not a linear projection into the future about what's changing?
Yeah, so you said quite a few years, 25 in fact. So yeah, quite a long time. And you know, seen the industry massively change over that. Yeah, the change, I guess, in consumer expectation, like, you know, Elsa mentioned, is changing. You know, I think, you know, if you go back 10, 15 years, it was all about the automotive experience and what those use cases were. Now, the consumer is benchmarking their experiences of consumer electronics, right? Let's talk about the voice for a minute, right? So we've all used voice systems in cars. We know the traditional systems of 10, 15 years ago from Nuance, which you loved or you hated. And some people got on with it and some people didn't. Isn't it interesting how now voice has taken a completely different approach? Yes, because we've got cloud computing, we've got more compute power, but because the tech industry has embraced it, you've got Siri, you've got Alexa, you've got the Google Assistant. And if you ask what the customer ultimately wants, is they want to bring in the services that they're using, not only in their vehicle, but in their homes. So bring that together rather than creating something bespoke. And again, this is the same thing goes for us. If we want to bring a voice experience, it's Alexa. Let's just make sure it's easier for us to do. And the companies will manage to do that by creating the right interfaces and the APIs. But the same then happens for other aspects. And, you know, just, you know, bringing one of the questions that I think, Scott, it's been asked for you in terms of, you know, the Google Android piece, there's plenty of opportunity. But if you try and create the whole platform from the bottom foundation to the operating systems, the interfaces, the security, the API, and then all the applications and services on top, that's a lot of work to do for a single OEM. So therefore, you need to take a value approach. Where should you spend your time and focus? And actually, it's the industry plays that will make our lives easier, because we can focus in our space. Where is the, you know, where is the uniqueness value that we can add for Jaguar Land Rover? But hey, let's also take the common pieces, because let's just say if we want to put an Alexa in the vehicle, we can all do that. And it's just making sure that we actually bring that piece together. Don't be fearful of it. Use it to focus on where you can add value. And I think going forwards, as we see the industry change, is the openness from OEMs to share certain things, because by sharing, it will make sure that these services last the longevity of that vehicle ownership, right? Because nobody wants to see a service here today and gone tomorrow, especially if you own a car for 3 or 4 years, and then the second owner, and then the third owner. So these are the things that need to be taken into consideration. And these are the things where we need to make sure that we make it easier by commonizing interfaces and platforms. And the industry, therefore, does need to change and embrace it rather than fragment.
Peter, one thing, I remember you and I sitting many years ago at Telematics Update in Munich at that, you know, what is it, the luxury hotel on the Maximilianstraße, and you had a really lovely car sitting outside, I think. I can't remember which one. And you and I got in it, and you demoed for me, you know, some of the some of your in-car apps, because obviously we were working on SDL on AppLink, and you were working on that. And what's interesting is, I guess this is now reality, which is this idea of, in the past, you know, developing something for automotive was years, right? Was a very long time. And obviously now we're actually talking about deployment of experiences very quickly. And I think, you know, I think it's worth mentioning that, you know, the industry has completely changed in terms of timescales and time to market, because obviously the connected vehicle literally has opened the door for us to be able to work with a company and deploy those things. It's also opened up this, I guess, the scope of the type of companies that we can work with, right? Because normally startups and an OEM was kind of oil and vinegar, or you know, it just didn't mix together very well, because we were on very, very different trajectories, right? By the time we would get to market with something from a startup, they could well be out of business by that time. So I think it is worth pointing out. I'd love to hear from some of, you know, from Elsa and SOHALIA around, you know, that time scale and how that has dramatically changed the opportunities for partnering with companies, or perhaps SOHALIA investing in companies, because it's a very different market now.
So I think it's true and not true. So it's true for the connected car space for sure, but if you are, let's say, a digital wire harness company, which we have to have one in the portfolio, you still have to plan for years to get into serious production, because it depends on, you know, the tender process and then the entire development process, product development process. It's just very long process. So I see the challenge for a lot of deep tech companies still having to do with those very long development life cycles. But also, yes, it's shortening overall, and then the entire industry is under pressure and wants to develop faster. Actually, this is a fair investment area as well. There are a lot of companies that help in a connected engineering space, for example, to shorten the development time and to bring, you know, new technologies to market faster. So this is definitely a priority for all of the OEMs. And yes, it's much better overall. But when you are a deep tech company that is heavily wired in the car, it's still challenging.
Elsa, do you have any comment to that?
I just would add that we are within the business lab. We are not working only on product innovation or tech innovation. We are working more largely, and we are open to collaborate with startups who could provide solutions regarding, once again, industry, supply chain, but not only HR, purchase. I mean, all those kind of solutions who could provide us some gain in operational efficiency. So it's not only a question of automotive tech. For sure, we have some collaboration with startups, for example, in battery, power electronics, and so on. But not only, and I would say this is, we share our startup portfolio between tech and non-tech startup, I would say.
Thank you. So Halia, I would like to ask you a question. Obviously, cars are becoming more an iPhone or a smartphone on wheels, and many of the innovations in the auto industry were hardware, but now most of them are software. I wanted to know if your investment focus has also gone in the direction of investing purely in software, or are you also pretty much looking at hardware?
It's a pretty good question. We're investing in both software and hardware. And it's really good that we are still out there as also hardware friendly investors, because typically these companies have really struggling to find venture capital. So both is for us relevant. All of our investment areas can be found on our website, as was mentioned before. And it's pretty much along the lines of ACES. So everything with the double S, though, I would say it's shared and sustainability. And these are all of the areas that we typically invest in.
Thank you. Peter, I want to ask you, the car industry obviously is one of the most regulated industries in the world, and there are recalls, there are many safety concerns. Do you think that the startups that you're meeting are aware of just how regulated the industry is and what they need to do in order to support it effectively?
I would say no, because there's a bit of an education difference, right, in terms of, you know, the liabilities and the quality and the controls also we need to put in place. Because, you know, when a customer sees a vehicle, they see the total value of the vehicle. They don't see just an application or a service. So that's one thing. And one of the reasons why it sometimes takes a little bit longer to make sure that, let's just say, a technology company wants to work with an OEM, to make sure it works, is not only just for the technical aspects, but it's also the legal frameworks, right? Automotive companies are very complex because they're used to working with traditional tier ones. And these are some of the things that over time that need to become overcome. And obviously with the likes of BMW iVentures, you kind of act as that abstraction between the traditional OEM way of working and then obviously the tech companies. And I think this is where industry plays with platform providers can actually help soften that piece. But it is complex. And this is one of the reasons why there needs to be that education piece, which is where are the things that we can focus on and add value and get quick wins to market? You know, what is the MVP? And then what is that longer term game? Different aspects will have different pieces. So for example, you take autonomy, there's going to be a lot more there is a lot more regulation there, and there's a lot more pieces around even the software interfaces and what information you can access. But even in the entertainment space, There's regulation on driver distraction, on what to do, what not what to do. And with all the companies that we have worked with, that often is the longer lead time onboarding process, is that education, what you can do, what you shouldn't do, what you shouldn't be doing. And then on top of that, with a connected car, we've got all the new compliance pieces like GDPR, cybersecurity pieces, to making sure that the customer, the car, their data, everything is held safe and securely. Bringing that together can actually then be a bit of a minefield for some of these organizations. But one thing I would say, and hopefully my industry colleagues would agree with me here, most of those elements are the same for the industry, right? So whatever you would have to predominantly do in Europe or in North America for one OEM, it's the same for the other. And these are the things that we can definitely commonize, take the pain away, reduce some of that burden, to make sure that we all get the benefits of the robustness, but also the education back from or back to the startup organizations. We've still got a little bit more work to do, because OEMs have naturally come from different areas where even views on what you should show, what you could show is different. But even those are starting to come towards a consistent piece. Things like Android Auto has definitely helped that by having a bit of a framework, and so has CarPlay. So we need to do that, because again, it comes back to the point I made earlier, is share the education, reduce the fragmentation, reduce the cost burden, and obviously sustain things in the market for longer for that purpose.
Great, thank you very much. So we have only a couple of minutes left. I wanted to just give our panelists one last opportunity to give some advice to startups that are in the audience in terms of what would be the fastest way for them to interact and to cooperate with different OEMs. Scott, parting words?
How did you get to work today? Ed, I can't help but laugh about that. I think I got out of bed and walked a couple of feet to my room. That's how I got to work today. I guess just final note from the Ford side is, we're open for business. We want to collaborate. We want to obviously identify partners that we can work with. I think we're really spending a lot of time to change and to evolve as a business, and obviously as an organization. And so we'll continue to do our best to, I guess, uncover some of those companies that have some incredible solutions, both on the hardware side and of course on the software side.
Great, thank you, Scott. So Sohalia?
So as mentioned before, best way to get into contact with any VC is a warm introduction. So I would recommend everyone to try to get a warm introduction through someone they know that is connected to some of our team members. That's the smartest way.
Thank you. Elsa?
So once again, we are fully convinced of the interest to work with the startup ecosystem closely as a disruptive innovation provider, model about customer-centric development and execution speed and frugality model. And the best way to work with us, once again, is to go through our open innovation partner.
Thank you. And Peter?
So I guess for us, it's obviously through the Emotion team. Some people will go direct to because we've got specific use cases. But the key thing for success is making sure that industry colleagues like this get together. We get a common platform and a common view to actually share the goodness, so all of our customers can start enjoying it, because there's enough differentiation to be had on the wider aspects of the car. So collaborate.
Great. Well, thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you for our participants. And really, all these OEMs are out there trying to figure out how to bring in new innovations. 75% of you are operating at home. I hope that next time we can do this in person and meet each other. That would be a better experience. And hope that all of you stay safe and we could help each other move forward this coming year safely and healthy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.